Like that's all it boils down to, because I know sometimes people can hear the word boundaries and go, ugh, here they go again. Like, what is this new agey idea? There's nothing foreign about it. It's just it's the expectations that we have upon ourselves and that we have upon other people,
Yes.
and the way that we want to move in the world. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Living Fullness. I'm Stina and joining me on the podcast is Father Sean Burns. Each week you'll hear us chat about a range of topics from virtue to relationships, comments on cultural shifts and lessons we're learning as we go along, and we're so happy to have you join us. So sit back and enjoy being part of a conversation with a couple of friends. How are you going, Padre?
I have hot chocolate. That's how I'm going.
Okay. Is that a good thing?
I have hot chocolate, and that's a very good thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
I have one too. It's a mint one.
I'm very happy.
This is your happy place.
This is my happy place.
Hot chocolate in hand. Recording. Padre's in his happy place.
Yeah.
What's been happening other than your hot chocolate?
Well, I've been interviewing some prospective applicants for the seminary.
Ooh.
So,
what does an interview look like for a prospective seminarian?
well, there's questions, and I ask them. So I try not to give too much away. It's pretty simple. It's not that secret. It's just covers a number of things. So firstly, the application form. I go in and fill out the application form with them and write it down. And I ask subsequent questions as a result of that. The application form has some interesting things on it too, like have you ever killed anyone, or have you? Because that's it's an impediment against ordination. If you killed someone, you can't become a priest except by dispensation from the bishop. So I just get to know them a little bit, and I already know them by this stage quite well. But I get to sort of just say, how do you see your vocation having developed to this point? Like, could you describe your journey to this particular moment? Mm-hmm. How did you arrive here at this interview? What strengths and weaknesses are you going to be really looking to work on when you're in the seminary?
Yeah, nice.
What are the things? So if they're overseas, I'm also asking them questions like, well, why Wagga? Why Australia? Why do you want to come here for? So yeah.
Yeah, wow.
That's
cool.
sort of what's going on there.
Sounds a bit intense.
Oh, yeah. It's good though.
Yeah,
it's good.
Sure.
Yeah,
sure.
How about yourself?
For me, I finished the Be Healed course run at the Cathedral, your parish, a couple of weeks ago. So just kind of going back over the course and adjusting things.
Yes.
You can work many hours on creating a course, but it's not until you actually run it that you can see where the fine tuning needs to happen.
100%.
So yeah, just kind of tweaking that. And I took the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to read some of the feedback that we got from the participants, and there was some very moving feedback when we asked them what they actually got out of the course.
That's good.
You kind of imagine that the responses you'll get will be content related, and there was a few that wrote some very personal things about how this course has kind of shifted their personal relationship with God, which was not something I certainly was expecting to see in that feedback form. So
Sure.
That was really beautiful.
That moves hearts. That's good.
Yeah.
And thank you for running it too.
Yeah, pleasure. You could really see the fruit. So in today's conversation, I guess we are going to have a little bit of a chat around boundaries. Kind of spoken about boundaries in season 1.
Yeah.
But I don't think we've actually dedicated like an episode to boundaries.
No.
So I think
we've not really dedicated an episode to, so let's do it.
And this one sort of came with the encouragement of one of our Patreon patrons.
Yes.
Patrons on Patreon.
Patrons. Yes.
So thanks for the suggestion. Okay, so let's talk about a few different areas that we might need to consider boundaries. Maybe the first and very obvious one is physical boundaries.
Okay.
So any kind of immediate thoughts that jumps at you in terms of physical boundaries?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, I'd go with boundaries with oneself in terms of healthy eating, which admittedly I'm not always great at. Healthy eating, sort of even things like sleep.
Yes.
Although that's also probably mentally a mental thing as well.
Both, yeah.
But it's definitely for physical operation, like actually setting boundaries for yourself in terms of sleep, food, even work and play. How much time do I spend at work? How much time do I spend at play? Knowing your limits physically as well. There's a boundary that you can't push past, because if you do, you're going to hurt yourself. I'm thinking like lifting certain things, which I mean, these are all so mundane, but they're all actually boundaries that we need to be aware of physically.
Yeah.
If we're going to give due care to to the body that God has given us. So often when we think of physical boundaries, we do think about it in the context of with someone else.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that in due course, but there also needs to be a healthy sense of physical boundaries with ourselves as well, so that we're looking after ourselves and loving ourselves in the good sense.
Yeah. I guess just to backtrack as well, when we talk about boundaries, all boundaries really are is like a limit or an endpoint or a frame around how you operate, which is all based on our expectations. Like that's all it boils down to, because I know sometimes people can hear the word boundaries and go, ugh, here they go again. Like, what is this new agey idea? There's nothing foreign about it. It's just it's the expectations that we have upon ourselves and that we have upon other people and the way that we want to move in the world. So bearing that in mind, when it comes to physical boundaries, I guess for me it comes down to, well, what is it that we're creating boundaries around? Why do we even need these boundaries physically? And that comes down to our body being sacred, that we actually have an obligation to care for the physical body that we have. So all of those things that you're talking about are essential in order for us to show reverence to the body that we have been given.
Temples of the Holy Spirit, right? Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Even with that too, this sort of does go to the physicality aspect, but time as well. Like how do you guard your time? How do you spend your time? Is time spent too often or too frequently in recreation? Or is it spent too much or too frequently at work? Is work chewing up family time? Or are you not setting boundaries around hanging out with friends or what you're saying yes to from your employer or from, like that? That all includes, I think is included in setting boundaries around your time as well and where you're going to be and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, even the simple things like you were talking about with sleep, are we actually putting aside adequate time for rest for our bodies to be recharged at the end of the day, which doesn't just start with the moment we drag ourselves to bed. It actually starts way earlier than that of what we do in the steps leading up to create a space that sleep hygiene wise it's optimal for us to get the sleep that's required. Yeah. So, all of those things, absolutely, when it comes to time. And also, like you were saying, being mindful of whether we're putting aside too much time in one space, in one area that isn't helpful for us to thrive, or we're not giving enough time to other areas that need adequate time.
Absolutely. So what about emotional and mental boundaries?
Yeah, these ones are a little bit harder to draw clear-cut lines around for some things. I guess when it comes to emotions, the very first line I would draw is that emotions are not meant to be messed with. So anything that perpetually messes with our emotions, whether it's because of the things that we're viewing or the people we might be associating with, doing too much of one thing or not enough of another, that's not ideal for our health and well-being. And I think would communicate something about how we treat ourselves and perhaps even how low we value our own mental health and well-being if we allow for those things to continue to exist in our space. And I know that this can be a space, particularly for women, that's very challenging. I hear from stories of women all the time who are willing to go to the nth degree for people all of the time, regardless of what their emotional state may be at. So almost to the detriment of themselves, go to the, who, if someone needs them for something, go and do whatever is required without taking stock of, but am I actually in a place of abundance where I can give away, or am I so depleted that I actually don't have anything else to offer? In which case, what we're offering is not actually the best that we've got to offer for that other person anyway, but also doesn't show reverence to who we are either. So both that emotional and mental space is something that deserves to be protected, but we're also meant to give from that space too, but give from a place where we actually have something to give, not from a place where we're actually running on empty.
Absolutely. It's so important to be able to give of ourselves generously, but also to know that giving of ourselves generously doesn't mean putting ourselves in harm's way, like mentally and emotionally putting ourselves in harm's way. It doesn't mean that. And I often say to my seminarians, look, I have a million problems that come to me every single day, but none of them are mine. They're problems that I will share in. They're problems that I will sit down, I will listen to, I will walk with someone, but in the end, they aren't mine. That's theirs, and I can't take that on as mine, because if I take that on as mine, I actually already have my own stuff. I can't take on somebody else's stuff because if I take on somebody else's stuff, I have my stuff and somebody else's stuff.
Absolutely.
And that's just not that's not good for mental health.
Absolutely. No. And this is where we end up with vicarious trauma as well. Right. When we're sitting with other people's painful stories and some of it starts to seep into our own and our lives start to be impacted by the listening and sitting with the other person's story, which in your world as a priest, you'd be very susceptible to that with the stories that you hear.
And yours as a counsellor.
And me as a counsellor as well.
So how about relational boundaries?
So this is really taking stock of who are the people in our lives that we're in a relationship with. And that doesn't necessarily mean your spouse or your romantic partner or whatever. All sorts of relationships, from the people that we call our close friends to the people that we work with to anyone that we might have any kind of regular contact with.
Yeah.
Maybe these are just the people that you share a pew with in church.
Sure.
You don't, might say hi and bye, but you don't have too much of a conversation with them. So just kind of taking stock of who are these people and what is the kind of relationship that we have with them. Which of these relationships do we prioritize? And also knowing whether you're a priority in their relationships, like with you as well. Like, is it a mutual thing or is it a one-way thing?
Show.
Not that there's anything bad with having some relationships where it's one way. For me as a therapist, that's what happens with my clients. It is a one-way. There's a mutual relationship insofar as me building rapport with them, but it's a one-way street. They're there to get support from me, not the other way around. So there will be some relationships that are like that, but are they generally all like that? Because then we have concerns there. And then also questioning how much we might invest in those relationships.
Yeah.
Are there any where we give more than others? Are there ones that you would like to have more investment in but currently isn't, either because you're not able to give more or because the other person isn't able to give more or, whatever it might be. But yeah, taking stock of those relationships and asking whether this is actually where you want to be.
Definitely. That is quite important to recognise that in every relationship, every relationship is going to look different, and there need to be boundaries in place to ensure that whatever the nature of the relationship, that it respects the nature of that relationship. It reflects the nature of that relationship. So that if you've got two friends, there's going to be something reciprocal about those boundaries. And there's going to be certain expectations there that will be fulfilled that have an element of reciprocity to them. It's perhaps also worth addressing physical boundaries in the context of a romantic relationship. The reason why I take the time to address that is that it happens frequently enough as a priest. I get asked frequently some permutation of the question, how far is too far, or what can we do as boyfriend or girlfriend or fiancés? You're sort of like, guys, you do realise that boundaries are meant to be carried with you through to your married life. Like, they're not just a constraint that exists prior to marriage. Yeah. They're actually going to live in your marriage too if it's going to be a healthy marriage. So let's set boundaries that are healthy now so that you can set boundaries that are healthy in the context of your married life. Things like boyfriend and girlfriend going over at one or the other's house at nighttime to watch a movie. It's just going to end badly. Don't do it. Do it during the daytime. Daytime's great. If it's going to be a lengthy affair, invite somebody else over. Have a healthy buffer. It's accounting for the physical attraction that exists, the human weakness, desire to protect each other in that space. So actually bringing that expectation of mutual protection into play is just so important. And probably the same thing in regards to friendships as well. Like, in order to keep friendships pure and stable, particularly if they're between a man and a woman, then that friendship needs to have some pretty clear boundaries that are set around it about when they catch up, how they catch up. There needs to be almost like a sunlight principle. Your actions are for the light of day to see. Like, there's nothing hidden about it. You know what I mean? So there's boundaries around that I think are important, and we need to be more aware of that. And
Hearing what you're saying there, I think expectation is the key word again. For me there, one, and I guess the conversation I would have if someone were to approach me and say, hey, how far is too far, is, well, what do you expect from the relationship that you have at the moment? What are the expectations in the relationship that you have? What do you actually want from this relationship? So not just the protective or not just the limitation barriers that need to go up, but also what are the good things that you want to foster, and what are the actions that you need to live by in order to foster those good things, because those are the things that you would like to have in your relationship. So 100%. You're kind of working towards expecting to have these good things in your relationship. So, hence why the virtue of chastity is such a beautiful one when it comes to relationships, because it's not just what can't we do at this point in our relationship. It's what is the virtue that you're trying to cultivate? What do you actually want from your relationship? And what are the actions you need to take then to move towards that?
This is what I love about virtue, is that it takes what otherwise could be seen as a religion of no into a religion of yes, right? While still cultivating very clear expectations, as you say. So what do we need to actually build boundaries properly?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing is having a sense of that, the personal expectations that we were just talking about, but also having self-awareness as well. So actually knowing yourself, which again is something that we've talked about many a times on this podcast before, but it is actually essential for us to be able to grow in the kind of relationships that we want and for the kind of person that we want to be as well. We need to know where we're at right now, to be honest about that, to be transparent about that, particularly if we're in a relationship with another person. What are we kind of bringing? The really good strengths that are things that we're really confident in, really secure in, and the places that we're not too sure about, that we're a little bit vague on, or we know are weaknesses of ours. What are we actually bringing to the table?
Definitely. And with that then is communication skills, right? Because if we have that self-awareness and we have personal expectations, we need to be able to communicate both those things. We need to be able to communicate those areas of growth. We need to be able to communicate the expectations that we have. It's important that we're actually able to give words to the expectations that we have and to communicate where we want this particular relationship, whatever it may be, where we want this relationship to go, and to be open then also to receiving that from the other person too. Because communication, at least in the context of a friendship or relationship, that communication must never be a one-way street. It's always got to be a two-way street, right? So being open to receiving that from someone else as well. And I guess there's probably some kind of non-verbal communication in there as well, like having some awareness of the other person's non-verbal cues and comfortable, uncomfortable, that sort of thing. But yeah, definitely being able to communicate expectations, desires, and for that to be, generally speaking, a two-way street.
And then from there, I guess it's about being assertive as well. Actually, once you've communicated what your boundaries are, holding on to that, being firm in that, not hiding that this is something you need, this is something that you expect to come from these interactions or these relationships, and to be secure in that doesn't necessarily make you any kind of negative, whatever it might be, insert your own word, but that you're actually owed that by respect, because this is your boundaries. This is about what's going to help you flourish, what's going to help you feel secure, and what's respectful between the two of you in relationship as well, which ultimately comes down to what's most loving. But being able to be assertive in that, and just acknowledging too that we can only ever control what we do. We can never control what somebody else does.
Yes.
So it's actually on us if the other person is not adhering to our boundaries or overstepping our boundaries. It's on us to be assertive and say, whoa, hold it. I think I communicated myself perfectly clear. This is what I expect. I do not like this. Please don't do that again. And then if it happens again, well, then we need to have a consequence to that. You need to really reconsider, is this a relationship you want to continue when you know that this is someone who oversteps your boundary?
Definitely.
Not by accident, but
purposely transgresses, right? Or even, purposely transgresses is one thing, but you might also have someone who's just so woefully unaware that they continually to sort of carelessly transgress that boundary. And in which case you've got to act again. You're going to say, hey, this is not okay.
Yeah, and that's where that accountability comes in. It's, again, on us to hold them accountable because it's our boundary.
That's right.
We can't expect other people to know what our boundary is. Like, we need to take ownership of that. Just as we can't expect to know what everybody else's boundary is in our lives, we kind of, when we enter into a decent friendship or a relationship, we kind of expect to be able to move freely and to be able to trust them enough to know that if you accidentally do something that you didn't intend to do, as in cause some sort of distress to that other person that you didn't intend to do, that other person will speak up and say, whoa, please don't do that again. That makes me feel uncomfortable, or I don't like that, or here's my limit. This is as far as I'm willing to go.
Yeah.
Like it's on them to communicate that back to us, but also that's how it builds trust.
Yes.
That's how we build trust in them. So we have to do the same thing. We have to offer them opportunities to make a change by helping them to realise what our boundary is, because it's our boundary, not theirs.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you very much, Stina, for that. That was wonderful.
Yeah.
A Truth, Beauty and Goodness.
Why don't you go first this time, Padre?
Okay. My Truth, Beauty and Goodness is the course that you ran for my parish. In particular, you gave them a new orientation, a new way of looking at the wounds in their lives, and a new way of seeing Christ's healing active in them, particularly in just something as simple as God actually wants to give you the gift of healing. Not simply because he wants you to be on mission or something like that, but just because he loves you and he wants to give you the gift of healing. And really challenging them to see that and seeing what lies crop up as a result of that and whether they actually believe that that's true or not. And just it's given them that opportunity to really think about that. And hopefully particularly for there's a number of them that I know have yielded a great deal from that. And so I'm very grateful. It was a very beautiful, very true and a very good cause. So thank you.
Pleasure. Beautiful experience to be a part of with that group as well.
How about yourself?
For me, it's actually the witness of someone more recently. She's a devout Christian, and I had a conversation with her. She was talking about how she was going to offer this other person something very financially generous, who this other person may or may not be entering into a space that might be a little bit tricky financially, not dire straits, but might become a little more stressful. And she was just sharing that she was thinking of stepping in and kind of alleviating that for that person. And I was very quick to jump in and say, hey, whoa, like there's no expectation for you to do that. It's one thing to give from your means. It's another to be as generous as she was expecting to be. And she was just so detached by the whole thing. It was not a thing for her. And it kind of just startled me for a little bit. Then I thought, well, I'm not here to judge, like whatever. She knows her own financial means, whatever.
Yes.
Let it go kind of thing. But then later on in that conversation, she did a similar thing with someone else who may have needed some pieces of furniture and whatever else, and she was quite happy to just let it go and let someone else have it. And I said, well, hang on. You might need that in a few months' time. Like maybe you won't need it for the next couple of months, but hey, you might need that in about 6 months' time. And again, she was just so detached by the whole thing. She was very quick to say, if I need it, God will sort it out. And I remember sort of being taken aback by that too. And as we continued the conversation, she then kind of very quickly pointed out to me that it all belongs to God anyway. So it put me back in my place. But her witness has just made me kind of rethink my own financial attachment as well. So she's just kind of made me think about attachment and detachment in a very different light. And yeah, that was a beautiful light for her to shine into my life. So yeah.
Praise God for generous people.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us for another episode of Living Fullness. We will catch you again next week. But until then, know our love and prayers.
God bless.